My name is Sarah, I'm 29, and my own sister stole my husband, got pregnant, and then had the audacity to demand I leave my own house. Before I tell you how her face completely crumbled when I revealed the truth, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. I love seeing what city everyone is watching from. It makes this feel like we're all just sitting and having coffee together. It all started on what I thought was the best day of my life. I never imagined I'd own my dream house at 29, but there I was, standing in front of a beautiful two-story colonial in a quiet Austin suburb, the kind with a wraparound porch you see in magazines. After 5 long years clawing my way up as an investment manager at Westwood Capital, I had finally saved enough for a massive down payment. This was it. This was everything I'd worked for. "This is it, Mark," I said, squeezing my husband's hand as we stood in the driveway. My heart was beating so fast I thought it might burst. "What do you think?" Mark smiled, his brown eyes crinkling at the corners in that way that always made me melt. "It's perfect, babe. You did good." That was one of the things I loved most about Mark. He was a high school history teacher, and while his salary was a fraction of mine, he'd always been my biggest cheerleader. He never seemed threatened by my success. When I first told him I wanted to buy the house entirely with my own money and put it solely in my name, he didn't even flinch. "You earned it," he'd said simply, wrapping me in a hug. "Besides, I'm saving up for our future kids' college fund. We're a team, right?" I remember hugging him so tight that day, feeling like the luckiest woman alive. Most guys I knew would have thrown a fit, their pride wounded by their wife making such a huge purchase. But not my Mark. He understood. The day we moved in, I couldn't stop smiling. The house was everything I'd ever dreamed of: 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen with a huge island, and a big backyard just begging for future barbecues and kids' birthday parties. I'd made sure to put down enough money so the monthly mortgage payments wouldn't strain us. Being in finance had taught me the importance of living within our means, of building a secure future. That evening, as Mark and I sat on our new porch swing, watching the Texas sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, everything seemed perfect. We talked about our plans, how we'd decorate each room, where we'd plant a garden in the spring, and which of the sun-drenched spare bedrooms would one day become the nursery. Later that night, lying in our new bed, listening to his steady breathing beside me, I felt a deep, profound sense of peace. I had a loving husband, a beautiful home I had earned, and our future seemed limitless. I drifted off to sleep thinking how absolutely perfect everything was. That first weekend, we were unpacking boxes in the kitchen when Mark said, "You know what we should do? We should have dinner with my parents this weekend. They're dying to hear all about it." "That's a great idea," I agreed, carefully unwrapping our wedding china. "We should visit my family soon, too." The dinner with his parents, Carol and Frank, was supposed to be a simple celebration. They had always been kind to me, treating me like a daughter since Mark and I started dating. They lived in a modest ranch-style house across town, and the whole place smelled of Carol's famous pot roast when we walked in. We were all sitting around the dinner table, passing mashed potatoes, when Carol clasped her hands together, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "So, tell us all about the new house, you two. We are just so proud." I opened my mouth, ready to share every detail, but Mark beat me to it. "Actually, I wanted to surprise you guys," he said, and his voice swelled with a pride I'd never heard before. His chest puffed out just a little. "I bought us a house." The fork clattered from my hand, hitting the plate with a sharp crack that sounded like a gunshot in the suddenly quiet room. My head snapped up, my eyes locking onto his. Across the table, Mark's eyes found mine. They weren't smiling anymore. They were pleading, begging me in a silent, desperate language to go along with it. My blood ran cold. The air in the room thickened, heavy with the lie Mark had just dropped onto the dinner table. I felt my chest tighten, but I forced a smile, my face feeling like a porcelain mask that might crack at any moment. Under the table, Mark's hand found mine, his grip sweaty and desperate. "Oh, Mark!" Carol clasped her hands to her chest, her face glowing with pride. That's wonderful. Isn't it wonderful, Frank? Frank beamed at his son, his chest puffing out. That's my boy. Always knew you'd do well for yourself. He then turned his gaze to me, a warm, paternal smile on his face. You've got yourself quite a man here, Sarah. Not many young men these days can afford to buy a house like that on a teacher's salary. He must have been saving for years. I just nodded, a mechanical movement. I pushed the food around my plate. The delicious pot roast that had smelled so heavenly minutes ago now felt like a lump of lead in my stomach. The rest of the dinner was a blur of praise and adoration, all directed at Mark. He soaked it up, describing in vivid detail how he'd found the perfect property, how he'd negotiated the price, how he'd saved up for the down payment. He was a masterful storyteller, weaving a tale of financial responsibility and success. And I just sat there, the silent, smiling prop in his one-man show, feeling like I was in some bizarre alternate reality. The drive home was suffocatingly silent. The streetlights flashed across Mark's face, illuminating a tense set to his jaw I'd never seen before. The moment the front door clicked shut behind us, the door to the house my money had bought, I turned on him. What in the world was that? I demanded, my voice low and shaking with a fury I could barely contain. Mark ran a hand through his dark hair, a nervous habit I knew well. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry, Sarah. You know my dad, he's old school. He'd never understand a man living in a house his wife bought. So you just lie? You take credit for years of my hard work, my 16-hour days, my sacrifices? It's not like that, he said, finally looking at me, his eyes pleading. It's complicated. All my friends from college, they're lawyers, they're in finance, they're the breadwinners. Their wives stay home. My dad, he sees them, he hears their stories, and he looks at me. A teacher. He's proud, but I know he worries. For once, I wanted him to look at me the way he looks at their sons. Like I'd finally made it. His confession hung in the air between us. It wasn't just about his dad being old school, it was a deep, gnawing insecurity, a feeling of inadequacy that I never knew existed. I saw the shame in his eyes, the desperate need for approval. And a part of me, the part that loved him, softened. Please, Sarah, he begged, taking my hands. Can we just let this be our story? Just for them? It doesn't hurt anyone, and it just makes things easier. It doesn't change anything between us. It's still our house. We're still a team. I looked around at the beautiful foyer, at the staircase I'd fallen in love with, at the life I thought we were building together. I was exhausted from the move, from the emotional roller coaster of the evening. I didn't have the energy to fight. Fine, I sighed, the word tasting like defeat. Whatever, Mark. Whatever makes you happy. He pulled me into a hug, relief washing over his face. Thank you, he whispered into my hair. You won't regret this. But as I stood there in his arms, in the hallway of my house, a tiny, cold seed of doubt was planted in my heart. And I had a terrible feeling that I would regret this. I would regret it very, very much. A week later, we were sitting in my parents' living room. The air was thick with the familiar scent of my mom's potpourri. My younger sister, Chloe, was there, visiting from her downtown apartment. Chloe and I were night and day. I was the planner, the one who went into finance and mapped out my life. She was the free spirit, drifting from job to job, always chasing a new, fleeting passion. We have some big news, Mark announced, a proud grin spreading across his face. It was the same grin I'd seen at his parents' house, and it made my stomach clench. Well, I have some big news. I wanted to give Sarah the home she deserves, so I bought us a house. I watched my family's reactions like I was watching a slow-motion movie. My mom and dad were beaming, their faces alight with pride. They rushed to congratulate Mark, patting him on the back, praising his success and his generosity. But my eyes were locked on Chloe. She smiled and offered her congratulations, but I knew my sister. I saw the flicker in her eyes, a flash of something sharp and ugly before it was gone. It was jealousy. Pure, undiluted jealousy. She'd always talked about wanting the perfect life, the big house, the successful husband, the fairy tale. And here I was, living her dream. Or so she thought. That flicker in her eyes stayed with me for weeks. Life settled into a comfortable routine, but that seed of doubt from the first lie had taken root. I couldn't shake the feeling that our foundation wasn't as solid as I believed. Then, exactly 6 months after we moved in, the doorbell rang on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I opened it to find Chloe standing on my porch, her face a mess of tear-streaked mascara, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "Chloe! What's wrong?" I pulled her inside, my concern genuine despite the unease I felt around her lately. "They cut my hours at the restaurant," she choked out, collapsing onto our new gray sofa. "I'm barely making part-time now, and my rent." She dissolved into a fresh wave of tears. I sat beside her, rubbing her back just like I used to when we were kids and she'd had a nightmare. "How bad is it?" "I can't afford my apartment anymore, Sarah," she whispered, looking up at me with those big, brown eyes we'd both inherited from our mom. "I need a place to stay." Can I stay here? Just for a little while? Just until I can figure something out." I hesitated. My mind screamed no, what about Mom and Dad's place? "They have the spare room." "Their house is on the other side of town," she protested, wiping her eyes. "It would take me forever to get to work from there." "Your place is perfect. It's close to everything, and you have all these empty bedrooms." Her logic was sound, but my gut was twisting into knots. "I don't know, Chloe. Let me talk to Mark about it." Not 10 minutes after she left, my phone rang. It was Mom. "Sarah, your sister just called me," hysterical, she said, her voice laced with accusation. "You have to let her stay with you. She has nowhere else to go. She's family." That evening, I brought it up with Mark over dinner. "Chloe needs a place to stay," I explained, pushing pasta around my plate. "She's in a tough spot with work." Before I could even voice my own reservations, Mark jumped in. "Of course she should stay with us," he said immediately, not even looking up from his plate. "We have the room, and she's your sister. It'll be fun having her around." I stared at him, surprised by his enthusiasm. He'd always gotten along with Chloe, but this was different. It felt too easy. Too eager. A few days later, Chloe moved in. I helped her set up in one of the spare bedrooms, the one with the best morning light, the one I'd been planning to turn into my home office. As I watched her unpack her life into my house, that cold seed of doubt in my heart began to sprout, sending icy tendrils through my veins. I felt like I had just willingly opened the door and invited the enemy inside. The first few weeks weren't so bad. In fact, they were deceptively pleasant. I'd come home from a grueling day at Westwood Capital to find dinner on the table, not just takeout, but real, home-cooked meals. The house was spotless, the laundry was always done, and Chloe seemed genuinely happy to help. But then, things started to change. It was subtle at first, so subtle I wondered if I was just being paranoid. "Here's your coffee, Mark," she'd say at breakfast, setting his mug down with a little flourish. "Black, just a hint of sugar. Exactly how you like it. Sarah always makes it too sweet, doesn't she?" Mark would just grunt in agreement, buried in the sports section. Or she'd be folding laundry in the living room and comment, "I noticed your work shirts were always so wrinkled before, Mark. A little extra care with the iron makes such a difference, don't you think?" I tried to ignore it, to brush it off as her just trying to be helpful. But the constant, tiny digs were like 1,000 paper cuts. One evening, after a particularly pointed comment about how she'd finally gotten the kitchen pantry properly organized, I pulled her aside. "Chloe, can we talk?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. These comments you're making, they're starting to make me feel uncomfortable in my own home." She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "What comments? I'm just trying to help out." "My gosh, Sarah, you're being so sensitive. Don't tell me you're jealous because your little sister is doing some housework." She laughed, a light, dismissive sound that made my blood boil. Then it escalated. 2 weeks later, I came home from work to find Chloe in the kitchen, wearing what could barely be called clothing, a sheer tank top with no bra and a pair of tiny shorts that left nothing to the imagination. Mark was sitting at the counter, supposedly working on his laptop, but his eyes kept drifting up to her. "Chloe," I hissed, pulling her into the hallway. "What are you wearing?" "It's hot in here," she protested, but a sly smirk played on her lips. "Go change. Now." She rolled her eyes but complied. Later that night, as Mark and I were getting ready for bed, he brought it up. "Don't you think you were a bit harsh with Chloe earlier?" he asked, climbing into bed. "She's just comfortable around family." I stared at his reflection in the mirror. "She was practically naked, Mark." "You're exaggerating," he sighed, turning away from me. "Besides, it's her home too, now." His words hit me like a slap. Her home. When had that happened? The real turning point came a month later. I was facing the biggest deal of my career, a massive investment contract that required a presentation in Austin. The night before my flight, I was in my home office, putting the final touches on the report. It was nearly midnight, and my eyes were burning. Chloe appeared in the doorway, holding a mug. "You look exhausted," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I brought you some coffee." "Thanks, Chloe, just put it on the desk," I said, my eyes glued to the screen. As she leaned over to place the mug down, her arm slipped. The entire cup of hot, black coffee cascaded directly over my laptop keyboard. There was a sizzle, a pop, and the screen went black. "Oh my God," she shrieked, her hands flying to her mouth. "Oh, Sarah, I am so sorry. It was an accident." My hand just slipped. I stared at the dead laptop, then up at her face. Her eyes were wide with faint horror, but I saw it again, that same flicker of malicious triumph I'd seen in my parents' living room. It was no accident. I had to drive to the office in the middle of the night and recreate the entire presentation from scratch on a company computer. I worked until dawn, fueled by rage and caffeine. I didn't tell Mark what happened. What was the point? He would have just defended her. While I was in Austin, the second attack came. A colleague and mutual friend, Jessica, texted me. "Hey, saw pics from Mark's barbecue last night. Looked fun. Sorry you had to miss it." My heart stopped. "Barbecue? What barbecue?" She sent me a screenshot from another friend's social media. There they were, Mark and Chloe, standing by our grill, surrounded by our friends. Chloe was wearing one of my sundresses. The caption read, "Amazing night with the best hosts, Mark and Chloe. So great to finally have a woman in the house who loves to entertain." It was a coordinated attack. They weren't just having an affair, they were trying to erase me from my own life, painting me as the cold, absent, career-obsessed wife while Chloe seamlessly slipped into my role. They were poisoning my social circle, turning my friends against me, all while living under my roof. I felt a hot flash crawl up my neck. I was being systematically dismantled, piece by piece, by my husband and my own sister. And I had let it happen. The meetings in Austin went better than I could have ever imagined. Fueled by a cold, hard rage, I delivered the presentation of my life. Mr. Henderson, the CEO, was blown away. By the end of the second day, we were signing papers on a deal that was even bigger than we'd projected. It meant a significant promotion for me, and a bonus large enough to pay off a huge chunk of the mortgage. "You've got a very bright future ahead of you, Mrs. Miller," he said as we shook hands. "Westwood Capital is lucky to have you." Normally, I would have been ecstatic. I would have called Mark immediately, bubbling with the news. Instead, I just felt a hollow victory. I called the airline and managed to get on an earlier flight home. I didn't call to tell them I was coming. I wanted to see it for myself. The taxi dropped me off at my house around 8 p.m. The lights were on upstairs in the master bedroom, and I could see Mark's car in the driveway. I unlocked the front door, my heels clicking softly on the hardwood floors. The silence of the house was eerie. Then I saw it. On the coffee table in the living room, there were 2 wine glasses, one with a lipstick stain matching Chloe's favorite shade. And draped over the banister of the staircase, the one I had so lovingly chosen, was Chloe's silk blouse. It felt like a punch to the gut. My breath hitched in my throat. I knew. In that instant, I knew everything. But I had to see it. I had to face the monster I had let into my home. My stomach lurched as I climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. I could hear music playing faintly from our bedroom. Our bedroom. And soft voices, a low murmur, then a light, feminine laugh that was definitely not mine. I reached the top of the stairs, my hand shaking as I reached for the doorknob. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. I pushed the door open. Time stopped. The scene before me burned itself into my brain, a permanent, searing image of betrayal. Mark and Chloe, tangled together in the sheets I had picked out, in the bed we had shared, in the room that was supposed to be our sanctuary. They didn't notice me at first, too wrapped up in each other. Then Chloe's eyes fluttered open and met mine over Mark's shoulder. And she smiled. She actually, genuinely smiled, a slow, triumphant, vicious smile. Sarah. Mark scrambled to cover himself, his face a mask of panic and shock. This isn't. I can explain. Chloe stretched lazily, like a cat, not bothering to cover herself. She sat up, the sheet pooling around her waist, and swung her legs over the side of the bed. Oh, don't bother explaining, Mark, she said, her voice dripping with condescension as she started collecting her clothes from the floor. She was bound to find out eventually. I stood frozen in the doorway, my purse slipping from my numb fingers and hitting the floor with a dull thud. My voice, when it finally came, sounded strange and distant, like it belonged to someone else. How long? A few weeks now, Chloe said casually, pulling on her panties as if we were just having a casual chat. We're in love. Aren't we, Mark? Mark looked like he was going to be sick. He just stared at me, his face pale and clammy. Oh, and there's one more thing, Chloe added, her hand drifting down to rest protectively on her flat stomach. I'm pregnant. Found out a few days ago. Mark's head snapped toward her, his eyes wide with a new kind of horror. Clearly, this was news to him, too. The room started to spin. My sister and my husband. In my bed. A baby. It was too much. A low, guttural sound escaped my lips. Get out, I whispered. Chloe laughed. A real, throaty laugh. Get out? Oh, honey, I think you're confused. She walked towards me, all smug confidence, pulling on her jeans. This is Mark's house. He bought it, remember? He provides for us. I'm the woman of the house now. So I think you're the one who needs to leave. You have 1 hour to pack your things and get out. I stood there, staring at my sister, as the full, absurd reality of the situation crashed down on me. She believed the lie. She had swallowed it whole. She genuinely thought she had hit the jackpot, seduced a wealthy man, secured her future with a baby, and was now the queen of a castle he had bought. She had no idea. She had no idea that everything around us, every single thing she was claiming, was mine. And I couldn't help it. I started to laugh. It started as a low chuckle, bubbling up from somewhere deep inside me, a place where shock and grief and white-hot rage were churning together. The sound grew louder, more hysterical, until tears were streaming down my face and I was bent over, clutching my stomach. It was the laughter of a woman who had lost everything and found it all hilarious. Chloe's smug face twisted in confusion. "What's so funny? You're being kicked out of your home and you're laughing like a lunatic." I wiped the tears from my eyes, my laughter finally subsiding into shuddering gasps. I straightened up and looked her right in the eye. "Oh, Chloe." Sweet, delusional, pathetic Chloe. I took a step into the room, my room. "This house," I said, gesturing around at the walls I had chosen the paint for, the furniture I had spent months picking out. "This beautiful house that you think you're going to live your perfect little life in with my cheating husband, it's mine." "You're lying," she spat, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty creeping into her eyes. The confidence was starting to waver. "Am I?" I smiled, a cold, sharp smile that didn't reach my eyes. "The Mercedes that Mark drives? The one he told everyone he got with his Teacher of the Year bonus? Also mine. I bought it for him last year because he said his old Honda wasn't professional enough. The investment portfolio he brags about to his friends? It's my portfolio. He doesn't have a dime to his name that I didn't give him." I turned my gaze to Mark, who seemed to be shrinking into the headboard, trying to disappear into the Egyptian cotton sheets I had paid for. "Tell her, Mark. For once in your miserable, insecure life, tell the truth." Mark flinched under Chloe's fierce, questioning glare. He couldn't look at either of us. He just stared at the floor, his voice barely a mumble. "It's true. Everything belongs to Sarah. I told everyone I bought it because I wanted to look successful." The color drained from Chloe's face. It was magnificent. The transformation was instantaneous. The smug queen of the castle vanished, replaced by a wild-eyed, cornered animal. Her fantasy, her entire life plan, had just evaporated into thin air. She let out a shriek of pure fury and grabbed one of the decorative pillows from the bed, the silk ones I'd spent a fortune on, and started beating Mark with it, over and over again. "You liar! You pathetic, worthless, broke liar! You told me! You promised me! Both of you, stop!" My voice cut through the air like a whip, sharp and commanding. Chloe's screams and Mark's pathetic attempts to defend himself ceased instantly. They both stared at me, their faces a mixture of fear and shock. "I am done with this circus," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You have 1 hour to pack whatever you can carry and get out of my house. And Mark," I added, looking at the man I once loved, "don't worry about the divorce papers. I'll have my lawyer send them to your parents' house." Chloe's demeanor changed in a flash. The rage vanished, replaced by that manipulative sweetness I'd grown to despise. "Sarah, you can't," she whimpered, tears welling up in her eyes. "You can't kick me out. I'm your sister. Your pregnant sister. Where am I supposed to go?" I looked at my watch. "That is not my problem. You have 55 minutes left. If you're not gone by then, I'm calling the police and having you removed for trespassing." I turned and walked out of the bedroom, leaving them scrambling in the chaos they had created. I didn't look back. My hands were perfectly steady as I walked downstairs to the kitchen and made myself a cup of coffee with the fancy espresso machine I'd bought myself last Christmas. I sat at the kitchen island, sipping slowly, listening to the frantic sounds from upstairs, doors slamming, drawers being yanked open, the occasional sob that I assumed belonged to Chloe. My phone rang 10 minutes later. Mom flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. "How dare you?" she screeched before I could even say hello. Her voice was shrill, vibrating with indignation. "Chloe just called me, crying her eyes out. Kicking your pregnant sister out onto the street. What kind of monster are you, Sarah?" "She was sleeping with my husband, Mom," I said flatly, my voice devoid of all emotion. "They've been having an affair for weeks." When I caught them, in my bed, she tried to kick me out of my own house. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. For a foolish moment, I thought she might actually show some sympathy. I was wrong. Well, she said, her tone shifting from outrage to a cold, calculating reason. Maybe you should just let them have the house. You're successful. You have a high salary. You can afford to rent a nice apartment. Chloe is pregnant now. She needs stability. It would be the kind thing to do, Sarah. Think of the baby. I was floored. It felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. Letting them have the house? My house? The one I had bled for? I don't want to have this conversation, I said, my voice turning to ice. In fact, I don't want to talk to you at all right now. I hung up before she could respond, staring at my own reflection in the dark kitchen window. I barely recognized the hard, cold woman staring back at me. But maybe that was a good thing. The hour passed both quickly and agonizingly slowly. Finally, they appeared at the bottom of the stairs, each carrying a duffel bag and a trash bag full of their things. Chloe's mascara was streaked down her face again, but her eyes were hard and full of hate when she looked at me. You'll regret this, she spat venomously. You think you're so perfect with your big house and your fancy job. You'll end up alone and miserable. I didn't even bother responding. There was nothing left to say. I just watched from the window as they loaded their bags into Chloe's beat-up old Corolla and drove away into the night. A profound weight I didn't even know I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. The next day, after a 2-hour meeting with my lawyer to start the divorce proceedings, I came home to find both sets of parents waiting for me in my driveway. My mom and dad looked furious. Carol was crying softly into a handkerchief, and Frank's face was a dangerous shade of red. How dare you throw them out, my mom demanded as they followed me inside. Your own sister. Pregnant. And you can't just kick a man out of his own house. Frank added, his voice booming in the foyer. The house he bought for you. I'd had enough. I walked past them into the living room, set my purse down, and opened my laptop on the coffee table. Actually, I said, my voice calm and clear. Let me show you all something interesting. They gathered around, confused. I clicked a few times, my fingers flying across the keyboard. First, I pulled up my online banking portal. I turned the screen towards them. Look, I said, pointing with my finger. Here is the wire transfer from my personal savings account to the escrow company. A down payment of $200,000. Their eyes widened. I then opened the folder on my desktop labeled House and clicked on a PDF file. The official county deed loaded onto the screen, clear as day. And here, I said, moving the cursor to highlight the name under grantee, is the deed. Notice the buyer's name. Sarah Elizabeth Miller. A single woman. Mark's name is nowhere on it. Not on the deed, not on the mortgage, not on anything. I watched their faces as the irrefutable, digital proof sank in. Carol let out a small gasp. My mother's face went pale. But he said. Carol stammered. He lied, I said simply. He told everyone he bought this house because he was too insecure to admit his wife was the breadwinner. He has been living off my success while pretending it was his own. That lying little. Frank exploded, his face turning an even deeper shade of red. I raised him better than this. He and a sobbing Carol left soon after, muttering apologies and promising to deal with Mark. My parents, however, lingered. The proof was right there on my coffee table, but somehow, it didn't matter to them. Sarah, you need to be reasonable about this, my dad said, using that calm, rational parent voice that always preceded an unreasonable demand. They're starting a family. A family? I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. You mean my husband and my sister's betrayal baby? Don't be cruel, my mom snapped. That's your niece or nephew you're talking about. Think about the child's future. I stood up, my patience finally exhausted. Let me get this straight. My sister sleeps with my husband, gets pregnant, tries to steal my house, and I'm supposed to just hand over everything I've ever worked for because they made a mistake? You've always been selfish, my mom said, her voice trembling with anger. Always thinking only about yourself. Even when you were little, you never wanted to share your toys with Chloe. This isn't about toys, Mom. This is my life. My home. My marriage. They destroyed it. If you don't help your sister, my dad interjected, his voice hard as steel, if you don't share what you have with family, then we'll have no choice. We'll have to cut ties with you. I stared at them, at the two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, choosing my betrayer over me. The decision was surprisingly easy. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. Get out. They left, my mom's final words ringing in my ears. You'll regret this. Turning your back on your own family. I slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. And in the ringing silence that followed, I didn't feel regret. I felt free. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly quick. My lawyer, Barbara, was a shark. Mark, likely under immense pressure from his ashamed father and with no money of his own for a legal battle, didn't fight anything. He knew better. He'd seen all the paperwork, he knew every asset was in my name, purchased before our marriage or with my own segregated funds. Fighting would just be a waste of money he didn't have on lawyer fees he couldn't afford. He signed everything, and just like that, he was gone from my life. I threw myself into work with a ferocity I didn't know I possessed. The Anderson deal was just the beginning. I took on more clients, closed bigger deals, and shattered every target set for me. The promotion I earned from that Austin trip was just the first of several. The gaping wound in my personal life became the fuel for my professional one. My salary skyrocketed. I was no longer just successful, I was a powerhouse. The house, which at first felt haunted by their betrayal, slowly became my sanctuary again. I started by redecorating, erasing every trace of them. I hired painters and had the entire interior redone in bold, new colors. I sold the furniture we had picked out together and bought new pieces that were entirely my style. The master bedroom, the scene of the crime, was the last to go. I couldn't sleep in there anyway. So I had it converted into a stunning home office, with custom-built bookshelves and a massive desk overlooking the backyard. It became my command center, the place where I built my new life. Out of a morbid curiosity, I kept tabs on them through social media for a while, before I finally blocked them all. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck. They got married in a small, sad-looking ceremony in my parents' backyard. Chloe posted endless updates about her pregnancy, always playing the role of the glowing, victimized mother-to-be. She never missed an opportunity to paint herself as the wronged party, dropping passive-aggressive comments about toxic family members and selfish sisters who abandoned their pregnant siblings in their time of need. The last update I saw, shared by a former mutual friend, was a picture of her and Mark squeezed into my old childhood bedroom at our parents' house. The room was cramped, filled with boxes, and they were sitting on a twin bed. The caption read, "Making the best of things while cruel people live in luxury. But we have love, and that's all that matters. #family first #true love." I closed the tab without reading the comments. Let them play happy family in their borrowed bedroom. Let my parents coddle them and enable their delusion, pretending their precious Chloe did nothing wrong. Let them all live in their little bubble of lies. Me? I'm doing just fine. In fact, I'm doing better than fine. The house is peaceful now, filled only with my things, my choices, my life. I travel. I've reconnected with friends who saw the truth and stood by me. I've even started dating again, cautiously, but with a newfound understanding of my own worth. I learned the hard way that you can't build a life with someone who feels diminished by your light. You need someone who wants you to shine brighter. Sometimes, the silence of an empty house is so much better than the noise of toxic company. And sometimes, the hardest and most important lesson you can learn is that the family you're born into isn't always the family you need to keep. You have the right to choose your own. You have the right to slam the door on anyone who tries to tear you down and build a new, better life from the ashes. And trust me, it is so worth it. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it helps someone out there who might be going through something similar. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice to cut ties with a family member for your own well-being? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found any part of this story helpful, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories. You are not alone.